Thank you, folks. Shana Tova. I'm just going to give it another minute to let some other people join. We had actually quite a large number of people register for this event, and we're looking forward to seeing you all in person. Feel free to turn on your cameras and to be a part of this very special event that will start in just one moment. I hope for those of you fasting, I hope you're having an easy fast. For those of you who are not fasting, and for those who are fasting, I hope you're having a meaningful day. And Yom Kippur is definitely one of those days that shouldn't go unnoticed. So I hope you're putting some meaning to it in some way. I'll just give you one more minute and then we'll get started. I think we're ready to go. So good afternoon once again. My name is Isaac Zablocki. I'm director of the Carole Zabar Center for Film at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. And we're very excited to host you here this afternoon for our annual Forgive Me Film-a-thon, which I'll talk about more in a moment. Just to tell you about some upcoming events as people get connected to their sound and get accustomed to the Zoom. Coming up next week, we are going to doing a virtual re-release of the film Asya, which was really one of the big Israeli hits of the year and was last year's Israeli contender for the Academy Awards. The following week, we're back to some in-person screenings on our rooftop. While the weather stays good, we're going to have a mini run of a new film called Adventures of a Mathematician. The following week, we're going to have a mini run of a film, an Israeli film called Golden Voices, a beautiful film. And then October 19th, we have the film Marry Me, However, about gay marriages in the Orthodox community in Israel. And then October 25th, we're going to be screening the film, the TV series, The New Jew. All of these, of course, with conversations and more. So please be sure to join us. Now to today. It's Yom Kippur. At the JCC, we believe that there are many pathways to Judaism and many ways to honor the traditions. And for me personally, and for many others, the movie theaters are my temple, and movies are my holy books. And that's, I think, what we have a lot to learn from, and a deeper way to take looks into our culture. And every year for many years now in partnership, it started in partnership, I should give credit where credit is due. We had a whole downtown partnership with the Forward and the 14th Street Y and JCP when this first started, and we would do these screenings in person on Yom Kippur, showing films relating to the messages of the holidays and the culture of the holiday. And then in the last few years, we've been doing this virtually, and the demand has gone up. So I know that I'm not alone in experiencing films in this way. And we're excited to make you a part of this conversation. And this year, when we were trying to think about how we want to highlight Yom Kippur and the holidays, the first film or TV series that came to mind was, of course, Valley of Tears, which was released exactly a year ago on HBO. And we were honored to actually be one of the first to premiere it before it was released. And then, of course, it became a huge hit. Like everything else we show, it became a huge hit afterwards. I'm patting ourselves on the back, but yes, false modesty. And then then as we were thinking about what else to connect it to, because it wouldn't be a film-a-thon if we were just talking about one program, the connection between Yaron Zilberman, the director of Valley of Tears, and his previous film, Incitement, I think brought in two sides of what this day, some of the elements that this day of Yom Kippur is all about. And we're really excited to have here the director of both Incitement, which for those of you who have not seen or do not know is the film that follows the story of Yitzhak Rabin's murderer, Yigal Amir. and also Valley of Tears, which follows, I think, is one of the greatest cinematic depictions of the Yom Kippur War, and really follows the start of that and into it in a really in-depth way. Yaron Zilberman, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor and a pleasure, always a pleasure. As I mentioned to you, the JCC is very dear to me personally. Two of my kids studied at the JCC, their first educational steps, and we loved the JCC. So I just want to say that it's such a great honor for me every time you invite us to any project and any conversation. So here it is, we meet again.
Thank you so much.
So, thank you. So yeah, it happened to be that these two projects in their Hebrew names, Hebrew titles of the projects. One is called, the Valley of Tears is called Sha'at Ne'ilah in Hebrew, which is, you know, the prayer that ends the Yom Kippur today. So that's that name. And Incitement, the previous movie that I made was, I mean, the last one last year was Incitement is Yamim Noraim. Yamim Noraim being the days of awe in a literal translation. In Hebrew, it has double meaning. But Yamim Noraim is like the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So we basically covered this whole period of year with these two projects. And both, I would say, what for me connects them on a very sort of high level, without getting into details, is to say that they're both exploring the two major traumas, in my mind, I believe, like the major traumas in modern Israel or Israel in general from 1948 on. These two events have sort of, there's Israel before Yom Kippur War, and after. There's Israel before the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, and after, in terms of, you know, almost consciousness. I mean, what Israel is and who the Israelis are, and Judaism in Israel is. So it has to do with these two major events that we tackled in these two projects, and that brings us to Yom Kippur naturally, because as I said, the two events are connected to Yom Kippur also with the title.
I couldn't agree more, and I think that you've really hit on like two core events of Israeli culture, and are kind of like the in many ways two of the holiest days of the year. I don't know if you have any more that will be coming next in your next films. If you plan to find any more key points in Israeli history, but the Yom Kippur War definitely is defined as a changing point for Israel, and Rabin's assassination. I would say also, as someone who grew up in Israel, I definitely see that too. Before we jump into the movies, I actually want to ask you personally. You're coming to us live from Tel Aviv now, and yes. I wanted to know what Yom Kippur is like for you in Tel Aviv on a personal level.
Yeah, Tel Aviv, you know, Yom Kippur in Israel, it means that there are no, you know, cars on the streets. So people like, they use, you know, these days to, in general, to walk in the streets, and mainly in bicycles and skateboarding. So children are out there. So we tend to go with the children and have that exploration. At the same time, it's a day of, you know, atonement. People go to the synagogue. I tend to spend it with my kids. You know, these are like a day that we, as a family, everything is totally quiet. There are no phones. There's no anything to do with work, of course. And we just spend it, you know, talking with the kids about the year, about what, you know, what people usually will do in Rosh Hashanah, we do in Yom Kippur, sort of try to do some soul searching within the family. So that's a day of focusing about, you know, our deeds, what happened, what will happen, and how we feel about life on a family level. So that's what we did, and the whole day we spent that, and yesterday as well. As I said, for me, it's special because of Yom Kippur. For example, on Tuesday, I mean, 2 days ago, before Yom Kippur started, there was an event in Ramat Gan, which is a city adjacent to Tel Aviv, where I was asked to speak about the Yom Kippur War. So I had that conversation. Before me spoke Mitzna, Amar Mitzna, who is, you know, a war hero in Israel, who was a tank commander, a major commander who, you know, received an honorary, what we call the Tzalash, you know, as a war hero.
A medal, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, so he got a medal. Yes, so so I spoke also about that. So for me, these days are really around these projects in many ways, where we discuss again Yom Kippur War. We watch movies related to the war, other documentaries related to the war, and that's for us. You know, the whole crew that made the project and the whole team. We, you know, connect, talk, and reach out to each other on that level, because that project took us into the war in a way that we felt that we're fighting the war 48 years later, or at that point it was 45 years, 46 years later, that we're fighting it as we started the project, honoring the soldiers that, you know, either were injured, families that lost dear ones, and everybody in that war was wounded. If it's not physical, it's definitely emotional, spiritual. There was that kind of wound.
So tell us more, just also for those who are less familiar and for those who possibly didn't completely get it from the show itself. What does the Yom Kippur War mean to Israeli society? You're a little familiar with American society and know that it's less present for us here on this side of the lake. What does it mean for Israeli society?
Again, you know, it's in New York. It's basically the Jews, you know, that experience it in a way, and here everybody is experiencing it in the entire country. At least for the Jewish part, which is 80% of the population, which means it's a holy day. It's a day where everything stops. As I said, there's just the day where nobody is doing anything related to work, and it's all about soul searching and looking inside, introspection. It's also a day where you ask for forgiveness from all your friends. Although it's, you know, it's one can ask for forgiveness every day, but this day, the symbol of it is a symbol of a day where one asks for forgiveness. You know, if you hurt somebody, if you're aware that you hurt somebody, it's a moment to ask for forgiveness. If you're not, you ask for forgiveness because you might have hurt somebody. They ask for you, and so it's that beautiful moment where you contemplate on that. You know, whether you hurt somebody, besides, I said, besides the Yom Kippur War, which is another thing that is ignited in that day as well. As I said, it's also reflection on that war. It was such a horrific war in Israel history, which was a day of surprise. You know, it's like the Egyptians and the Syrians attacked Israel on October 6th together on Yom Kippur, where everybody was in synagogue. And so it's also about that moment as well. It sends us by association to that emotion, that feeling.
So now we're almost 50 years, it was in 1973, of course, and 50 years later, how is it still recognized within Israeli society, the Yom Kippur War?
Well, because I think it has to do with Shat Ne'ilah as well, because Shat Ne'ilah, the Valley of Tears, sort of brought back the conversation about Yom Kippur, and it really opened big. It made a major change in Israel, both talking about the war and post-trauma, war-related post-trauma that has to do with that war. And everybody's talking about it. You know, the older generation that fought the war suddenly opens up all these stories that were hidden, that people didn't want to talk about, or people didn't want to hear about. Suddenly everybody's talking about it. So that's one thing that you can see. Also the young ones, because of Valley of Tears, started to be interested, instead of it being like a war, like talking now in the US about the Civil War. It's part of American history, but nobody fought it, and it's something in the past. In this case, it's something that, it's like Vietnam War, but for these kids, it's like something that happened in the past. Now it's not anymore. Now it's really about their parents, their grandparents. It's stories that they know, that they, were attached to the warriors that fought that war and lost their lives. It changed the whole conversation in Israel. So what's happening is, you see many documentaries, people talk about it, people go back to the movie and for the TV series, and they watch it, rewatch it, and discuss it. And it's a mourning, like real heavy feeling about the casualties and what happened to Israel.
It's really, and it's one of the many powerful things that film can bring to the table is keeping historic events and keeping really honoring events from the past and making them relevant and learning from them even today, which is something that's just one of the bonuses of film.
Yeah.
Let's jump into Incitement for a moment on the same level, talking about Rabin's assassination. You had mentioned before how that was one of the traumatic moments of Israeli society, of Israeli history, and one of the turning points for Israel. What does Rabin's assassination signify today for Israeli society?
Well, unfortunately, it became like a divisive event, in the sense that I hope that the majority of the country feels very bad about this assassination, but you could also see, part of the population that think that it's good that he actually was assassinated. And you can see parts of the country that think that, the square where Rabin was assassinated used to be called the King of Israel Square in the center of Tel Aviv. And so they changed the name immediately after the assassination to Rabin Square. And when I take a cab sometimes, and I ask, take me to Rabin Square, they will correct me and say, King of Israel Square, meaning they don't accept the change. And it's more and more, you can hear that a lot, which is something that shocked me when we made the movie in 2019, that was like, it's recently, and that was something that, people spoke out openly about, really, really extreme in my mind. So for those of us who supported the peace process and were for the peace process and believed that Rabin's assassination stopped at the peace process, that what Rabin, sort of the whole movement, peace movement, was actually an important one that would have led eventually to the end of bloodshed and not the other way around. I think that for us, it's devastating and traumatic event, and one that we have to keep on tell. Like in Passover, you tell the story of the Jews leaving Egypt. It's the same kind of telling that you have to keep on tell, so people would know, and something like that will never happen again. So I signed that, like a sign, a cautionary tale. That's so for us. This is what this means, and pretty soon we're going to have Rabin's assassination, which is November 4th. Coming up pretty soon. So we have these two events very close by. In that respect, for me, again, they are related in a very, on thematic ways. They are related. So that's what it means. Now, again, because that assassination had also to do with religious logic, people took religious justification from the Rambam, Maimonides, and used them to explain or to justify why Rabin should be assassinated. And because it was something sort of prevalent or accepted or preached in certain circles of settlements and other religious aspects, for me, it's all related in that way, because there was a religious culture, a color to it, of the incitement, basically, that combined also with right-wing logic, but the combination was lethal and brought the assassination.
One of the, and I agree, by the way, that Incitement should be shown every year, and people should rewatch it every year for on the day of Rabin's assassination, to never forget and remember the lessons from it. And one of the amazing things that the movie does is you somehow, and this I think connects to Yom Kippur too, is you get into Yigal Amir, the murderer, you get into his perspective. You're almost trying to, I don't want to use the term justify. You're almost getting to see things through his perspective, and he is the protagonist of the film. He is the person we follow. He is the perspective we get, and in some ways, the lesson I take from that is of course seeing things through another person's perspective to better understand where they're coming from and to understand their actions. Tell us a little bit about taking that angle and telling it. You didn't tell Rabin's story, you told Yigal Amir's story.
Yes, exactly. Because, the decision why to go through to tell the story through the eyes of the assassin was, for what you said, is for us to understand, what happened, but also to see, and what happened, after we made this research of years of research, including talking to the family of Yigal Amir and speaking to Yigal Amir directly in jail. By all this conversation that we had, what we learned was, although he can deny it and say whatever because of his own, egomaniacal sort of, logic of his assassin, but it's obvious that he did it because of incitement. Incitement was what pushed him to do it. He thought that he's going to be a hero in the eyes of his, reference of the people that he's, the people that he met, the people that he used to go to listen to, rabbis. He thought he will be a hero, and because of that, because of that feeling, he plus many other elements that we show in the movie, he went out to actually try to do it and eventually succeed. So it was important to show what affected the assassin to do the deed. So instead of us showing the other story and suddenly the rabbin is being assassinated and God knows what, and we show some incitement, but it's all, pretty much background story. Instead of having a background story, we focused on that story because this is the story. It's a story of a person being bombarded with incitement by some sectors of the Orthodox world, plus and settlers, etc., plus right-wing logic with rallies, very violent rallies, that together this logic brought about the assassination, or brought about this assassin to do, to shoot Rabin in the back with 3 bullets, 2 hitting him and 1 hitting his security guard. So that's what we wanted to show. The rest for me is, of course, everything is important in this tale, and I can foresee a movie about Rabin and he's being assassinated, and it's going to be also an important movie. But this, for me, was the only way to tell this story right now, when it's like fresh and hasn't been told in this way. And documentaries can cover, the other stuff. So that's the reason. It needs to be very, very strong for us to be shocked by what happened, so that we either, first of all, it's not going to happen again, that those who incite will know that it's going to lead to an assassination, to those who see incitement to call that this is incitement right now, so that it's not going to happen. And that's what the message is in that respect. And that's why we told it this way. Just more important and stronger.
I find it extremely powerful, and also to connect an assassin that, in many minds can just be a monster, to remind everyone of the humanity there, that this was a human being affected like everyone else.
Beautiful. What you said is beautiful. I just want to say it's beautiful because it was very important for me and for Ron Leshem, my co-writer, was very important for us to show, I mean, for me, as in the directing also, to show that he's a human being, that he's not, you know, what people try to label him as a crazy guy, as a mishugane, that came up with this like crazy scenario and went out to do that. And when people think that way, and it becomes the, you know, what people think sort of about the assassin, or what we call SF Shote, which is, I don't know how to translate it exactly, but it's like somebody outside of community, outside of the system, you know, not part of the majority.
Right.
When you do that, when you label him that way, you actually learn nothing, because it's an excuse. It's an excuse, but it's not the truth. The truth is that he's a human being like me and you, that was pushed to a place. Yes, he also had some, you know, personality issues. Definitely, there's an, you know, narcissistic, some narcissistic disorder. There's no question about that. There's no question that there are psychopathic lines to his personality, but it's not something that you would meet him and say, oh, look at that guy. The opposite. I met many people that told me that he used to be in their synagogue like a teacher, and a very respectable, if not even admired, teacher to others. He had big respect as a smart guy, one who cares, etc., etc. I think that's more important as a message, to show that you know, it came out not out of a crazy person, but rather out of a person that was led to believe that Rabin should be assassinated by justification that could have been completely, you know, countered by rabbis, countered by you know, politicians, that would have caused for him not to do it, and others too.
I think it's a really powerful way of making this important statement. I also see a connection, I mentioned this to you earlier, a connection between both Valley of Tears and Incitement. One element that comes up, and it's kind of in like a subplot of both films, is the class and cultural elements within Israeli society, specifically the tensions between Mizrahi society and Ashkenazi society in Israel. Why was that an important, where do you see that as an important role? What role does it play in both of those films?
Yeah, so I will start with Yom Kippur because it was 1973, which is an earlier date than 1995. So I would say that in Yom Kippur War, it was also sort of, as we said, it was a break in Israel society, in the sense that until then, the Ashkenazi Jews were leading the country. You know, if it's from Ben Gurion all the way to Golda Meir in 1973, that you have this leadership in a way that the feeling is that only they can run the show. You know, Eastern European Jews can run the show, and they can be the leaders and the management. They know how to manage a country, until we had this disaster, which they have huge responsibility towards, for doing making so many errors along the way, of not being able to predict a war that was actually in front of their faces, and not preparing appropriately, not responding appropriately. So all that that disaster fell on Israel, and that leadership was suddenly questioned. That was the beginning of that. And then you had the opposition, which is Menachem Begin, Zichrono Livracha, who was actually speaking to the voice of the Mizrahi Jews, who were the Mizrahim. You know, they were mistreated, no question about that. You know, by the leadership, by the establishment of Israel, totally mistreated, and felt all that that was boiling in that society. Where the Black Panther movement, following the American Black Panther movement, there was a Black Panther movement in Israel, mainly in Haifa and Jerusalem, in neighborhoods where there was that outcry, and suddenly Begin also managed to get that voice, representing that voice although he was also Eastern European, it doesn't matter. He managed to get that voice. And then they managed to, make what we say the shinui, the first big major political change in Israel was Menachem Begin's election. That was actually unfathomed at the time. So he became that with that voice, which leads until today with the Likud party. So we had that major change. So that's that on that level. During the war itself, we decided to focus, part of the show is to focus on, a tank unit where we have several Black Panthers that are, sort of fighting for equality within the unit and question and doubt, the commanders or actually the officers who were more from the kibbutz and from the moshav and, again, what was representing an establishment. So we had that conflict within the story because it was a conflict in Israel society at the time. And people in Israel, by the way, criticized that. There was major criticism about the fact that we focused on that. And, even people who loved the show were arguing against that aspect. But I can tell you that since the show, not before, but afterward, I interviewed many, many soldiers, and everybody spoke to me and told me stories and anecdotes, and they were all leading towards that, which means that it's part of the story. It's an important story, and so I'm happy that we used that. In 1995, Yigal Amir, again, a Yemenite Jew, feeling in this case again, not getting the respect, I would say, in quotation mark, that he thought that he should receive, being a smart boy, a good student in Bar Ilan University, doing his law degree. He felt, that he should be respected by the rabbis, settlement rabbis, but he didn't get that respect in a way. So he also felt that conflict, that tension, Mizrahim Ashkenazim tension, which also you can see Rabin as a representative of that, Ashkenazi world, of the father figure of Israel, again, continuing that Ben Gurion / Golda aspect of it, and him feeling, somewhat in this case, an inferiority complex that, was boiling also within, generations of the family passing it through, although his father was not part of that. But from the mother, when we interviewed her, we heard this, that theme. We heard that theme. Like, oh, he's the black kid who does all the hard work for the Ashkenazi. He only did their hard work, and he was their sort of, not slave, but their servant. So she, I think, also had that theme that probably influenced him significantly. So that was apparent too.
Thank you. A beautiful
all these themes. Yeah.
The connections are all there. Folks, This is going to be your opportunity now to be a part of the conversation. So if you have any questions, what you should do is put them in the chat box, and then we'll call on you. We'll open your microphones to ask the questions live. I'm going to ask one more question just to give everybody a time to get their thoughts together. But of course, one of the themes of Yom Kippur is repentance and change. I think there's no better tool for change than film. Honestly, that's why we do our work at the JCC. We show films not just for entertainment; they are entertaining, but not just for entertainment, but rather to actually create change in our society and impact people. What are you hoping? What were you hoping with both of these projects? What were you hoping? How are you hoping to impact people? What were you hoping people would feel when they came out of the experience? I don't want to say just the movie theater, obviously, because one of them's a TV show.
I'll tell you that, wow, we'll start with, again, we shot Nila with Valley of Tears. So the hope was that people would pay, first of all, attention to, the war in general. I wanted, I focused that on the direction for people to really feel what war means, the pain and suffering of the casualties. There are heroic stories, absolutely. The Israeli soldiers were heroes. There's no question about so many heroic, and as people say, this war was fought by the so-called simple soldiers, you know, not the major officers. Yes, officers, but lower in rank officers and, you know, people on lower ranks, they won the war. And in that respect, you know, they're major heroes. Yes, they are heroic and we show it, but I wanted again to put the focus on that war is painful and we should avoid war at all costs, and diplomatic effort should be at its peak at all time in order to avoid the next war, because we cannot, you know, stop the wars that happened, but we can hopefully avoid wars that will happen. For example, on the Egyptian front in 1973, the Egyptians wanted Sinai back. That's what they wanted. We occupied Sinai in the Six-Day War, and we used it as a buffer zone. So that if the Egyptian will attack, they're not going to attack cities in Israel, but they will first need to cross Sinai. So we used it as a buffer zone. And they said, if you're not going to give us back Sinai with peace, we'll have to take it by force, which we laughed at because Israel is so powerful. After Six-Day War, we are the heroes of the world, you know, in terms of soldiers who can touch Israel army. And well, they built this army for 7 years, and when it was strong enough, they attacked. They didn't need to win against Israel. All they needed is to create such a high level of casualties, to go so deep into the trauma, Israeli trauma, so that Israelis will feel in a different way and then want peace, which they did with, you know, with Sadat, between Begin and Sadat. They signed the peace treaty, and Sinai went back to Egypt. So maybe we could have avoided that war. Again, people argue, there are many historians I know that say, no, they were not ripe for peace. We were not ripe. They were not ripe. There's all sort of excuses and intellectual explanations, but I think I disregard these explanations, because at the end of the day, if you realize that eventually, if you think, move forward and you see that one day there will be a war, because their honor, you know, they lost Sinai, it's a big piece of land, and they are going to fight for it, and there will be casualties. And if you understand what that would mean to this country, where every casualty counts, you know, for us, one dies in Israel, there are so many, it's like a ripple effect that affects so many families, and it hurts everybody in such a significant way that eventually, you know, peace will come. So you might as well do it before the war. So that's the kind of thing, you know, that I wish that this show will you know, make an influence, will make an impact. And if not right now, it may be in 5 years or 10 years. Sometimes it takes, you know, time for people to realize, to digest, to comprehend the story, and then make the necessary, you know, to counter it. So that's one thing, but not the only thing. The second thing that was so important for me was to raise the issue of post-trauma, war post-trauma. These people that were in these fights experienced horrific days, horrific battles, and they are really wounded. And it's very important that Israel will, you know, be aware of it, let them speak, listen to them, help them, treat them, put a, you know, the Knesset, the parliament needs to, you know, assign a major budget to help these people, because the country sent them and the country need to take care of them. They protected the population, and the population now, I mean, society needs to take care of them back. That's how it goes. And so they're not a nuisance. They're not something that annoys. This is the opposite. You have to open your ears, open your heart, and be there for them. So I hope, and I see, that's what I see around, and I hope it's just, you know, that movement towards action, helping those wounded and also the families that lost dear ones. So that's on the Shat Nila, on the Valley of Tears level. On the incitement level, it's a little bit harder because, again, what I wanted is, as I said, for incitement to stop. And we experience incitement from time to time. You can see again, when Bennett was about to be elected prime minister with this coalition, although he was a minority, he has only 6 parliament members. So he's nevertheless, that was a solution for the whole coalition for him to be the prime minister. Suddenly, again, there were outcries from rabbis and also the religious figures about the catastrophe, and there were again, and luckily the news picked up on it. People spoke. I also spoke on TV to say to calm down. People stop the incitement and also connect the dots. If you'll have more and more of that kind of talk by influential people, somebody will take the initiative and do harm. So for me, that was the most important part. And again, just like in Valley of Tears, the second element is to honor Rabin and to bring back again this whole conversation where people will not forget that Rabin was fighting for peace, that it was a very hard fight because making change is always hard. You see Martin Luther King made change and he paid with his life, and Gandhi made change and paid with his life, and Rabin paid with his life, and Anwar Sadat paid with his life. So when you make a major change towards peace, towards equality, towards togetherness, those who wants to keep the old order, in many cases, they use the gun to win the argument. And we as a society have to fight against it. So I hope that message will, again, affect Israel society.
Sure, it's affected Israeli society in many ways and has affected internationally as these films have really gone way beyond Israel's borders. Folks, this was your opportunity to ask any questions and to be a part of this. I see you've been a little shy in the chat box, but if anybody has any questions, while we still have time before it's Shat Nila, before the Yom Kippur ends, this is your opportunity to be a part of this. I will say that this conversation has been really enlightening for me and has made my Yom Kippur so much more meaningful and relevant. So Yaron, thank you so much. Thank you for being a part of this.
Thank you.
Folks, I want to wish all of you first of all, a healthy year. If you're fasting, please have an easy fast and take care of yourselves. But I hope you keep finding meaning from everything you watch and engage with, and specifically this year, I know we're already talking about our fall lineup for the JCC in October has many meaningful films coming up. And in November 4th till the 11th, our Other Israel Film Festival, the 15th annual festival, will be hopefully in person and virtual too. And coming back to the movie theaters, to our temples, and discussing films like the way you would discuss any of our holy books, finding that extra meaning and taking it beyond just the superficial reading is something that I hope we all do together, because I think the communal experience is crucial to all of this. And that's why people pray together in the same way I think seeing a movie together is part of that experience. I'm going to bring on Nancy Cohen here, who has a question. And Nancy, I'm going to unmute you. You could unmute your mic, Nancy, and ask your question live.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I haven't seen the films yet. I have HBO and I will see them, but I wondered if, and it's a big question for a film director, but what can we do about fundamentalism here in this country, in Israel and everywhere? And its fundamentalist religion has not started every war, but they've had a big part in most wars.
Of course. I believe there are two things that you can do. I mean, it's society. One is when you have sort of a society pressure which means, for example, not to vote for fundamentalists, speak out against fundamentalism, make your effort if it even protests when needed, just to raise your voice against fundamentalism and just make it such that to diminish their power within society. That's one thing we have to do. Each individual has to do it in their own, way, in their own. It's each one can do a small thing. Like when you go to a protest, you're only one person, but together we're a big group of people, and we can raise our voice and raise our concern and make a difference. And the second is on the police enforcements and all this judicial system, is to be able to, when fundamentalists raise, usually they speak out, they're fundamentalistic, they want to convince people. So when people hear that, we need to analyze what it means, go out there. Of course, there's freedom of speech as well, which we need to honor, but there's a very sort of thin line between the two, and we have to address it. We can't just avoid it. We cannot hear fundamentalistic thoughts that lead to violence and be quiet about it. So I think these two things have to work out. In Israel, it's quite crazy because we have a person like Itamar Ben Gvir, who was voted for Knesset because Bibi Netanyahu needed more parliament members, more mandatim, as we say. He needed more power. So he took two sections of people that are very extreme and put them together. So together they will be able to cross, some threshold where they will be elected and have members that he can use. This is like nuts. It's unbelievable. And the guy is extremist, and things that he say is, he claims he's not racist. He claims all that stuff, but it's really, for me, it's really total BS. So, we have to do stuff about it. Absolutely, we have to be active about it and do whatever we can. And the rest is to pray, because they're crazy. They're crazies. No, they're crazies. That's what they are. I'm sorry. They take the word literally. They don't use compassion. And when you take things literally, sometimes things that are, biblical, other things, that were said, like in the case of Maimonides, were said in a completely different context, and they change the context and take word for word, and then you have a disaster. So we have to fight against it. I'm a filmmaker, so my best way is to make a movie about it, which is what I made, and I called it Incitement. So people would see, I cannot voice it better. It's like, incitement! Look what they're doing, stop it. More than that, I can do my own thing, but I have, fortunately, I have a way to communicate it sometimes to a larger audience, and that's what I do.
A very powerful tool, and what if there's one thing to learn from Yom Kippur is that there's not just one way or one group that owns this religion. And Yom Kippur, has so many wonderful messages that are definitely, I would say, go against any kind of fundamentalism. And there's so many entryways into Judaism, and learn from this treasure chest that can be so positive. I was thinking today just about the 10 Commandments, like the basics of Judaism, and these are all positive rules, and these are the basics of kindness to one another and treating one another in the best way possible that goes back thousands of years. And such a revolutionary concept. And that's something that, often others claim ownership to Judaism, and, don't necessarily give the space for those who look for the ethical side of the religion.
I can't agree more, Isaac. I can't agree more. This is like perfect. I want to say that when I grew up as an Israeli with the notion, for me, what was Judaism was about compassion, equality, equal society. That was what I learned. That was the sort of the essence of what the teaching, the Jewish teaching that I received as a secular person, growing up in the center of Israel, that was the message. And suddenly it turned out to be something else. Not for everybody, of course, but, you know, major sections and like, what's going on? So I'm with you.
It's amazing that a religion that its main holiday, Yom Kippur, at its core is about forgiveness and repentance and reflection and thinking about what you've done, and that same religion can bring out murder and can bring out not be for peace and bring out war and and sometimes that things get lost in interpretation.
Yeah. That's like the basic stuff.
Yep. Yaron, because we're almost out of time, just a final question for you. What are you working on next? What's to come?
Wow. That's the big question. I'm developing several projects, not one. Wow. I'm working on a documentary, and I'm working on a TV series, and I'm working on a movie. So I don't know which one will come first, but they're all in motion. And they are totally different topics. I'm dealing now with a different kind of trauma, which is child abuse in childhood.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sexual abuse in childhood, which is a very, very harsh subject matter, but it's one that is very important for me now to, sort of raise the awareness to. So I'm working on a documentary on this subject, already filming. I'm making a TV series about the conflict in a different angle, which I cannot reveal yet, unfortunately, but it's in the making. I'm just like under confidentiality at the moment, but it's set to be filmed next year. And another one, which is a project that I'm developing about the southern part of the Yom Kippur War. So this is about this was about the north. Valley of Tears is about the north. I'm working about a project about the south. Valley of Tears is about the first days of the war. Oops. No. Hello.
Hi, Yaron.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of a Zoom meeting. I'm sorry.
I will just mute him for a moment and then we'll be back. Folks, in the meantime, oh, here he is. He's back.
Yeah, I cannot see you. Somebody called me by mistake. I don't know what happened. Whoa.
We hear you and see you.
You see me?
We see you and hear you, yeah.
Okay, because I lost the connection. So where did you hear me until when?
So now you're making one about the South. You started the North.
Exactly. So I'm working about the South, and there's a Holocaust story. So I'm like pushing hard, and we'll see what comes next.
Yaron, thank you so much for, first of all, your films. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for sharing so much and making our Yom Kippur more enlightened.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at other events. The October films are up at jccfilm.org, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Have a meaningful day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.